Today I'm here to talk about municipalities and ecology. The ecology of a city. There's been a lot of thought to this going back many generations, and it's getting a new uh, view, a new look. What can a city do ecologically to improve health, save money, reduce pollution, increase general well being, inspire people? Imagine doing something that could do all five of these things. That's what I'm here to talk about. Here are some ways the cities can do that. You can enhance pollinator populations like birds and bats and butterflies. Lots of ways to do this. Having natural spaces, setting up bird and bat houses. Having, as you'll see, having ordinances that allow for bees and butterflies. Obviously, expanding parks, planting trees, encouraging native and diverse plantings beyond just trees. Lots of native plants will stimulate beneficial insects and pollinators. Make bike and pedestrian paths nature walks. So you can create pathways through the city or around the city that are very hospitable to all life forms. Include water features throughout the city. Those are called blue spaces. Reduce feral cats. This is often overlooked within cities. We have an ordinance in Galesburg that disallows this, but yet most people who have cats, I don't know most, but many of them do let their cats out. Support urban gardens and farms. This can increase native planting, and it has many other social benefits as well. Erect butterfly way stations around cities. Galesburg has quite a few of those. Make windows bird safe. I noted this in an earlier slide show. Have urban nature classes, right? How are we supposed to educate people about nature or supporting any of these different efforts if they don't do that? So a couple of examples from your reading. This is a site in Seattle. It's obviously right off the bay, very beautiful area, but it was a toxic site. And it was remediated and it was turned into a popular park now. 21 acres. Again, Knox College is a little over 80 acres, so about a fourth of the size of Knox College, but obviously a very wonderful place to go and explore and have just relax. One of the things about this site, of course, it was very toxic, so they had to put in a very thick barrier to prevent those toxins from leaching to the surface, and that's always something one has to take into account when building such a park. Here's a park in New York City. This was a former freight line, but the freight line fell apart, wasn't used, and so they returned the land into something that people love to walk, made it very natural, lots of trees and plantings. It's about 30 feet above the ground, above the base, and so that gives it a lot of nice vistas and such. This is about a mile and a half long. In Brazil, there was a project where we had a brownfield. This abandoned lot typically would be industrial of some sort in the past, and they turned it into a public-private outdoor museum. It was a place where people could go and walk or have food, have a lunch and such, or they could listen to a concert, and they can just engage themselves in nature. So in areas that are been abandoned, this is a really good reuse of space. Speaking of that, here's a map showing trends in the United States in population by county from 1980 to 2010. So if it's blue, you see growing population, which would say the majority of counties in the United States are growing, and that is largely due to immigration across the board. Now, in the center part of the map, Central Plains and many parts of Illinois, including Galesburg or Knox County, we see declines. And in fact, in the red zones are accelerated declines, and Knox County actually shows up as an accelerated declining location and this is from 1980 to 2010, so it may not be as current, although we've seen declines since 2010 in Galesburg. So this is a really big issue, but yes, it's something we have to look at from the standpoint of dwindling populations, and therefore, fewer students, lower property taxes, all of this kind of thing, which is challenging. We'll get into that later in the course, but it is very particularly important from the standpoint of having a lot of abandoned homes, as we see in Galesburg, and abandoned lots. If we look at some of the biggest cities in the country, here are just 6 I chose. It shows the city population both in 1950 and 2024, and then the metro area, which is the larger area of including suburbs and such, both 1950 and 2024. If you look at Chicago, you see the city declined 1 million people, while the suburbs increased 4 million people over this 70-year period. New York City was stable, but metro area increased by 7 million. Detroit, though, went down 2/3 of its population lost in this period, and these numbers are millions. And the metro area went up slightly, right? St. Louis was just under 1 million people in 1950, and it lost about 3/4 of its population. The metro area obviously almost doubled. Columbus is an exception. Went from 380,000 to 900, almost 1 million by the end of this time, and we see almost a 4-fold increase in its metro area. So that's an exception. Cleveland, similar to St. Louis and Detroit, lost about 1/3 of its population in the city, although in this case we also saw an increase in the suburbs. So in each of these cases, we have a mixed bag in terms of the city, but most of them, 4 out of 6, have shown a decline, where the metro areas have all seen an increase. And this is very common across the country. Here are the numbers in terms of the decline. So Chicago lost 28%, Detroit lost 67%, St. Louis lost 69%, Columbus went up significantly and very unique relative to the other cities, and then Cleveland lost a significant portion of its population. So what this means, of course, when you lose 50 to 60% of your population, you have less need for housing, less need for schools, less occupation of lots of buildings, and this leads to the potentiality of, well, obviously brownfields or dilapidated housing and such that needs to be either taken down or and hopefully then reused. When we think about trees, here's just a couple of studies. This is one that came out. The number of plants that were planted, in Portland, this group, for 3 decades, they planted nearly 50,000 different trees. And they, at the bottom, in the middle, I'm saying, there was roughly, for every 100 trees planted, of course, 50,000 is a lot of hundreds, 500 to hundreds, there were roughly 1 fewer non-accidental deaths a year, which is obviously significant. This is from a Harvard study in 2021, and it points out in the second paragraph, this assistant professor said that trees' effect on us translate into long-term changes in the incidence of depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, chronic diseases, including cardiovascular, heart disease, and cancer. Very significant benefits. Another study from Europe, accessibility and high-quality urban green and blue spaces such as parks, urban forests, tree-lined streets, allotments, riverbanks, and such provide significant health benefits. Green spaces improve air quality, reduce noise, and enhance biodiversity. They also moderate temperatures. Local communities use green spaces for physical exercise and social interaction, and for relaxation and mental restoration. People don't often talk about mental restoration, but it's an important area. Exposure to green space benefits in health include reduced mortality and morbidity from chronic diseases, improving mental health and pregnancy outcomes, and reducing obesity. Very phenomenal. And these are different studies that have been done, and study after study after study. We don't fully understand, the specific health benefits. Often, we believe that trees often emit aerosols like little particulates, and when they do so, they are breathed in by those who live by them, and they have benefits. It's almost like an extra nutrient that you're not getting if you don't live near trees. Who benefits the most? This suggests that people in lower socioeconomic statuses reap greater benefit than people with more privileged backgrounds, and specifically focusing on reducing reducing stress, and improving mental health. And they note that some cities and countries in Europe, urban gardens and urban green space provide opportunities for social integration, access to healthy food, and environmental learning, particularly for low income groups. And this has been, replicated through study after study. Very important and often underappreciated, frankly. We know we like parks, but we don't fully understand that by investing in them, it will have tremendous benefit for years to come. This actually looks at the money, and the last statement on here notes that every dollar invested in planting of trees sees an average return of $2.25 return on investment. That's more than 100% return. So that's very significant, and that again is something that continues to, every year. That's a return every year, not just for a year. So phenomenal return. Galesburg's Park and Rec Master Plan. It points to an NRPA study, and it talks about how much money was generated beneficial for parks and recreation. But it also notes that corporations and businesses choose to build their headquarters in cities that provide abundant trails, expansive greenways and blueways, and a populace that loves its parks and recreation facilities. And it notes that we could use the assets we have to attract significant investment. And I think that's another part that often gets overlooked. By making your city attractive in this way, you're going to draw people in. You're going to increase population, which will benefit your tax base and also nurture the economy. So does Galesburg have parks? This was mentioned by Mr. Simpkins on our field trip. Turns out, yes, this is from the study that I just mentioned. Galesburg is, in terms of parks per 1,000 people, we have over we have 21 parks, 22 parks, depending on how you count. So we have about a little over 30. Well, at this point, when we did the study, we had about 30,000 people. So we have about 7 parks per 10,000, which puts us very favorably. And then there's a standard median that they recommend. And then if you look at acreage, we actually outpace Quincy even. We have a lot of acreage per person, and more than double what is the standard. So phenomenal feat for Galesburg, and one that we should publicize more, right? So people know about it. And then also provide transportation and ensure that everybody can get access to these wonderful places. Now, here are the parks. We mentioned there's 22. And Parks 4, which is kind of in the center to the left of Knox College. And then number 7, which is the bottom. And then 13, which is on the south west. Those are 3 parks in the last couple of years that have been received state grants. We're matching those grants and putting several $1 million into these 3 particular parks, which is significant and really going to improve the south side of Galesburg, which is one of my primary objectives, frankly, because I could see, some of these parks had not been invested in for 50 or more years. And of course, so they had old, rusty equipment on them. People were not taking care of them. It was just a sign of the decline of those communities. And so by injecting more dollars into these and new products and a new kind of life into these parks, it's really going to help those communities. And so you also see the size of the parks. So, on the top, you see Lake Story. That's the biggest park we have. Number 20, you see Rotary Park, just to give you a sense of the size and scope. On the east side of Galesburg, we have Kiwanis Park, number 11, which is our biggest park as well, third biggest park. So, it gives you an idea. There's really 3 sizable parks in Galesburg. and the hope is that everybody has access. But as you can see, the northeast side of Galesburg doesn't have very much by way of access, and in the far southwest side of town there isn't much. That's why the improvements at four, I mean particularly 13, is going to make a huge improvement, and that's going to be a very significant project. I should point out, which I don't note here, there's a new park that's going to get some life in the southwest side as well, Cook School. And that's not shown here because it wasn't a park. It's a new park that's going to get started. And that's also, I should be added to this. That's going to be a very significant feature, and that should be launched within the next year or so. This is the park for Lancaster, which is the smaller park on the southwest side of town. And that was about a $500,000 project, and it's getting built right as we speak. Then the H.T. Custer Park is about twice the size and scope of that particular project, and over $1 million ultimately. We actually also put in to ensure that the playground was handicap accessible. We had actually a patron, a young girl, who came to one of the meetings, and she spoke of the need for that, and we were able to oblige. Now, in terms of parks, of course, you have a park, green space. Cities have to think about what's in a park and what's not in a park. And you need parks that have lots of amenities, but you also need them distributed so that different amenities are found. So if you look at Bateman Park, the number one, and we drove by this. It's on Losey Street. It had the tennis courts. What now? The pickleball courts. It says tennis here because again, we've just done that. That was about a $50,000 injection, converting a tennis court into a pickleball court. But we have a basketball court there, and we also have a playground. And one could look at the list of amenities. What you don't see there listed is essentially like a way station for butterflies or some type of bioswale, as we saw in Rotary Park. These are things that have natural benefits as well as things that are have things for people to do, and I think both are important. But we often favor the recreational side. Lake Story, of course, has a lot of these potential things. It's one of the most comprehensive parks, and Lincoln Park is next to it as well. It talks about the area, so it says here that Lake Story is 400 acres, Lincoln Park is 43 acres, so you get an idea of just the size. Rotary Park is about 12 acres according to this. Kiwanis Park is 53 acres, so that's a very sizable park on the southeast side of town, just to give you an idea of size. But you can see like Lancaster Park, this is before it's going to be redone, at one playground and nothing else. Well, that's going to be changed, right? It also, what's not noted here, are things like benches for people to sit and enjoy, and or even say maybe a water fountain, right? Things like that. So this is just to give you an idea of the various parks and the things that they have and don't have. But one would in a long term study, we'd want to look at how these parks are being. When's the last time they were improved? How old is the equipment? And how are they geographically organized? So that we have a basketball hoop within walking distance, for instance, from every house, or we have a dog park within walking distance, or we have a shelter, or a tennis court. Those kinds of things. These are things that can be beneficial, but they need to be spread throughout the community in a organized way, and that requires planning. Now, this is from the master plan as well, and there's a lot here. I'm not going to go through it. These are the main recommendations, but it talks about the importance of improving Lake Story to add different amenities. As was mentioned, Lake Story used to be more engaging for people, with the beach being open and them having the use of the pavilion on a more regular basis than they do now. And it talks about update the skate park at one of the parks for skateboards and such, and it had been in disrepair. It talks about expanding Lake Story potentially. That was a controversial issue a few years back. but something to think about. And then finally, and most important, very importantly, right, Galesburg Transit. We want to make sure that people can get to all the recreational areas or the parks via public transportation. So now, Galesburg has Project 350, but this is a project that started a few years back, and we planted 350 trees, or almost 350 yet, and it took us less than half the time we thought. And that's attributable to Tom and then all these amazing volunteers, including the Girl Scouts in the front. But Galesburg has a lot going on. So we drove by Standish Park, which is across the street from Alumni Hall, and this is Mr. Standish actually looking at some of those young trees that were planted in 1905, so over 100 years ago. And I want to point out, I mean, this is testament to, when you plant trees and you really invest in these things have multi-generational impacts. I want to thank Pete Schramm, who used to be a professor at Knox. He retired quite early. He's still alive and active, and he's been putting in prairies throughout the country, but he's put quite a few within Galesburg, the one near Target, but several others that a lot of people don't know because they're kind of behind the beaten path. We have a nature center and a nature educator. Darla is very active in that, and it's out by Lake Story. So the Arboretum, Mr. Standish, Urban Farm at Knox College, which has been around for about 12 years. We have several community orchards. We drove through past one. We have probably about 10 of them now, which is phenomenal. 12 years ago, we had, maybe one of them. So we've really started to expand that. And then again, those are fruit trees that will bear fruit for generations to come. We have a farmer's market, which provides people access to fresh food, and also, especially now around this time, and I encourage people to go there on Saturday, has plants, and people can, buy plants and grow those plants, and it's a phenomenal way to connect people with their local ecology. We talked about the urban farm grants. We're very unique in Galesburg to have those grants. We've made 4 awards now, with 2 more pending. So phenomenal work here. We have the University of Illinois Extension in Galesburg, thankfully, and they do horticulture classes. That's something you might be interested in looking at. And then we have the community garden, which is got an urban farm grant, but that's just beginning. La Ponda, and it's mentioned La Ponda is the day of celebration for those in the Congo, and we have many Congolese in Galesburg, and they are starting their own urban garden, but it's open to all. And if anybody's interested, let me know, because that will be something really starting to boom over the course of this spring and summer into the fall and future years. We have hopefully a botanical garden coming. There's a lot of dreams of that, and I'm working with some people to get that accomplished. I'll close with just noting that there are a lot of organizations that work on cities and making them beautiful and making them attractive, and also, of course, back to the original slide, improving their health, improving the economy, and making cities safer and more attractive places to live. And this is just one that you can look at. It's online. There's so many of them, I can't list them all, but if you're interested in this, particularly where you are, where you're from, or where you'll live in the future, you should check it out, because there's great potential for you to be part of this. And as Tom said, put a shovel in the ground and get started and get working on these different ways to improve our city. And to start, what's stopping us from doing this? And this was mentioned by Tom as well. Nothing happens unless first a dream. And I think that's really what it boils down to. So if you see the potential for a new, even if it's just a corner lot, or it's your terrace in front of your house or your neighbor's house, or in front of City Hall or whatever, you can make those places more beautiful, but at the same time, make them healthier, make them more vibrant, make them more attractive, make them more, and make them inspirational to those who come by and see a butterfly, or see a beautiful native flower, or even see in the modern day, see a honeybee in a flower, and just recognize the importance of that kind of effort that all of us are doing, both human and other life forms.